Section 27 of the Wit and Humor of America, Volume 9. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ginger Kukalo. How Jimaboy Found Himself by Francis Lynn. When Jimaboy began to live by his wits, otherwise, when he set up author and proposed to write for bread and meat, it was a time when the public appetite demanded names and naivete. And since Jimaboy was fresh enough to satisfy both of these requirements, the editors looked with favor upon him, and his income, for a little while, exceeded the modest figure of the railroad clerkship upon which he had ventured to ask Isabel to marry him. But afterward there came a time of dearth, a period in which the new name was no longer a thing to conjure with, and artlessness was a drug on the market. Cleverness was the name of the new requirement, and Jimaboy's gift was glaringly sentimental. When you open your magazine at The Contusions of Peggy by James Augustus Jimaboy, you are justly indignant when you find melodrama and predetermined pathos instead of the clever clowneries which the sheer absurdity of the author's signature predicts. "Item," said Jimaboy, jotting it down in his notebook while Isabel hung over the back of his chair. "It's a perilous thing to make people cry when they are out for amusement. Did the postman remember us this morning?" Isabel nodded mournfully. "And the crop?" said Jimaboy. "3 manuscripts, 2 from New York and 1 from Boston." "So flee the works of men, back to earth again," quoted the sentimentalist, smiling from the teeth outward. "Is that all?" "All you care about. There were some fussy old bills." "Whose, for instance?" "Oh, the grocers, and the Colemans, and the butchers, and the water companies, and some other little ones." "Some other little ones," mused Jimaboy. "There's pathos for you. If I could ever get that into a story, with your intonation, it would be cheap at 15 cents the word. We're up against it, Bella, dear." "Well," she said, with an arm around his neck. "It isn't well. It's confoundedly ill. It begins to look as if it were back to the farm for us." She came around to sit on the arm of the chair. "To the railroad office? Never, Jimmy love. You are too good for that." "Am I? That remains to be proved. And just at present the evidence is accumulating by the ream on the other side, reams of rejected MS." "You haven't found yourself yet, that is all." He forced a smile. "Let's offer a reward. Lost, the key to James and Isabel Jimaboy's success in life. Finder will be suitably recompensed on returning same to 506 Hayward Avenue, Cleveland, Ohio." She leaned over and planted a soft little kiss on the exact spot on his forehead where it would do the most good. "I could take the city examination and teach, if you'd let me, Jimmy." He shook his head definitely. That was ground which had been gone over before. "Teach little baby their ABCs? I'm afraid that isn't your specialty, heart of mine. Now if you could teach other women the art of making a man believe that he has cornered the entire visible supply of ecstatic thrills in marrying the woman of his choice, by Jove now, there's an idea." Now Jimaboy had no idea in particular. He never had an idea that he did not immediately coin it into words and try to sell it. But Isabel's eyes were suspiciously bright, and the situation had to be saved. "I was just thinking, the thing to do successfully is the thing you do best, isn't it?" She laughed in spite of the unpaid bills. "Why can't you put clever things like that into your stories, Jimmy dear?" "As if I didn't," he retorted. "But don't step on my idea and squash it while it's in the soft-shell crab stage. As I said, I was thinking. There is just one thing we can give the world odds on and beat it out of sight, and that thing is our long suit, our specialty." "But you said you had an idea," said Isabel, whose private specialty was singleness of purpose. "Oh, yes," said Jimaboy. Then he smote hard upon the anvil and forged one on the spur of the moment. "Suppose we call it the Postgraduate School of W.B., Professor James Augustus Jimaboy, Principal. Mrs. Isabel Jimaboy, Assistant Principal. How would that sound?" "It would sound like the steam siren on the planing mill. But what is the W.B.?" "Wedded bliss, of course." Here is the way it figures out. We've been married 3 years and 3 years, 5 months and 14 days, she corrected. Excellent. That accuracy of yours would be worth a fortune on the faculty. But let me finish. During these 3 years, 5 months and 14 days, we have fought, bled, and died on the literary battlefield, dined on bath mitts and café hydraulique, walked past the opera house entrance when our favorite play was on, and all that. But tell me, throb of my heart, have we ever gone shy on bliss? She met him halfway. It was the spirit in which they had faced the bill collector since the beginning of the period of leanness. Never, Jimmy dear, not even hardly ever. There you are, then. Remains only for us to tell others how to do it. To found the postgraduate school of W.B. It's the one thing needful in a world of educational advantage, a world in which everything but the gentle art of being happy, though married, is taught by the postman. We have solved all the other problems, but there has been no renaissance in the art of matrimony. Think of the 10,000 divorces granted in a single state last year. My dear Isabel, we mustn't lose a day, an hour, a minute. She pretended to take him seriously. I don't know why we shouldn't do it, I'm sure, she mused. They teach everything by mail nowadays, but who is going to die and leave us the endowment to start with? That's the artistic beauty of the mail scheme, said Jimaboy enthusiastically. It doesn't require capitalizing, no buildings, no campus, no football team, no expensive university plant. Nothing but an inspiration, a serviceable typewriter, and a little old postman to blow his whistle at the door. And the specialty, added Isabel, though some of them don't seem to trouble themselves much about that. Oh, yes. And the advertising, that is where the endowment comes in, isn't it? But Jimaboy would not admit the obstacle. That is one of the things that grow by what they are fed upon. Your ad brings in the money, and then the money buys more ad. Now, there's Blicker, of the Woman's Uplift. He still owes us for that last story. We take it out in advertising space. Also Dormus, of the Home World, and Amory, of the Story Lovers. Same boat, more advertising space. Then the Times hasn't paid for that string of space fillers on the lovers of all nations. The Times has a job office, and we could take that out in prospectuses and application blanks. By this time the situation was entirely saved, and Isabel's eyes were dancing. Wouldn't it be glorious, she murmured. Think of the precious, precious letters we'd get. Real letters, like some of those pretended ones in Mr. Blicker's correspondence column. And we wouldn't tell them what the W.B. meant until after they'd finished the course. And then we'd send them the degree of Master of Wedded Bliss, and write it out in the diploma. Jimaboy sat back in his chair and laughed uproariously. The most confirmed sentimentalist may have a saving sense of humor. Indeed, it is likely to go hard with him in the experimental years if he has it not. It's perfectly feasible, perfectly, he chuckled. It would be merely pounding sand into the traditional rat hole with all the implements furnished, teaching our specialty to a world yearning to know how. You could get up the lectures and question schedules for the men, and I could make some sort of a shift with the women. Yes, but the textbooks. Don't these fit-yourself-at-home schools have textbooks? Yes, I suppose they do. That would be a little different for us, just at the go-off. But we could get around that. For example, dear Mrs. Blank, replying to your application for membership in the postgraduate school of W.B., would say that your case is so peculiar. That would flatter her immensely. Your case is so peculiar that the ordinary text, books cover it very inadequately. Therefore, with your approval, and for a small additional tuition fee of $2 a term, we shall place you in a special class to be instructed by electrographed lectures dictated personally by the principal. Isabel clapped her hands. Jimmy, love, you are simply great, when you are not trying to be. And after a while we could print the lectures and have our own textbooks copyrighted. But don't you think we ought to take in the young people as well? Have a collegiate department for beginners? Shh, said Jimaboy, and he got up and closed the door with ostentatious caution. Suppose somebody, Lanterman, for instance, should hear you say such things as that. Take in the young people. Shades of the Rosicrucians. We wouldn't take in anybody. The very life of these male things is the unshaken confidence of the people. But, as you suggest, we really ought to include the frying size. It was delicious fooling, and Isabel found a sketchbook and dipped her pen. You do the letterpress for the collegiate ad, and I'll make a picture for it, she said. Hurry, I'll beat you. Jimaboy laughed and squared himself at the desk, and the race began. Isabel had a small gift and a large ambition. The gift was a cartoonist's facility in line drawing, and the ambition was to be able, in the dim and distant future, to illustrate Jimaboy's stories. Lanterman, the Times artist, whose rooms were just across the hall, had given her a few lessons in caricature and some little gruff, Teutonic encouragement. "Time," she called, tossing the sketch block over to Jimaboy. It was a happy thought. On a modern Davenport sat two young people, far apart, the youth twiddling his thumbs in an ecstasy of embarrassment, the maiden making rabbit's ears with her handkerchief. Jimaboy's note of appreciation was a guffaw. "I couldn't rise to the expression on those faces in 100 years," he lamented. "Hear me creak. Don't marry until you have taken the preparatory course in the postgraduate school of W.B. Home Study in the Science of Successful Heartthrobs. Why earn only 10 kisses a week when 1 hour a day will qualify you for the highest positions? Our collegiate department confers degree of B.B., postgraduate department that of M.W.B., members of faculty all certificated postgraduates. A postal card brings prospectus and application blank. Address: the Postgraduate School of W.B., 506 Hayward Avenue, Cleveland, Ohio." Isabel applauded loyally. "Why, that doesn't creak a little bit. Try it again, for the unhappy T.M.'s this time. Ready? Play." Her picture was done while Jimaboy was still nibbling his pen and scowling over the scratch pad. It was a drawing-room interior, with the wife in tears and the husband struggling into his overcoat. To them, running, an animated United States mail bag, extending a huge envelope marked, "From the Postgraduate School of W.B." Jimaboy scratched out and rewrote, with a pen drawing for an inspiration, "Hearts divided become hearts united." When you have taken a correspondence course in wedded bliss, a scholarship in the Postgraduate School of W.B. is the most acceptable wedding gift or Christmas present for your friends. Curriculum includes matrimony as a fine art, post-marriage courtship, elementary and advanced studies in conjugal harmony, easy lessons in the gentle craft of eating her experimental bread, practical analysis of the club habit, with special course for wives in the abstract science of honeyfugling parsimonious husbands. Diploma qualifies for highest positions. Our gold medalists are never idle. The Postgraduate School of W.B., 506 Hayward Avenue, Cleveland, Ohio. N.B. Graphophone with model conversations for married lovers, furnished free with lectures on post-marriage courtship. They pinned the pictures each to his copy and had their laugh over the conceit. "Blessed if I don't believe we could actually fake the thing through if we should try," said Jimaboy. "There are plenty of people in this world who would take it seriously." "I don't doubt it," was Isabel's reply. "People are so ready to be gold-bricked, especially by mail. But it's 12 o'clock. Shall I light the stove for luncheon, or can we stand Giuseppe's?" Jimaboy consulted the purse. "I guess we can afford stuffed macaroni this one time more," he rejoined. "Let's go now, while we can get one of the side tables and be exclusive." They had barely turned the corner in the corridor when Lanterman's door opened and the cartoonist sallied out, also luncheon stirred. He was a big German, with fierce military mustache and a droop in his left eye that had earned him the nickname of Bismarck on the Times force. He tapped at the Jimaboy door in passing, growling to himself in broken English. "I like not dis lighthouse keeping, for dese babies mit der wood. Dey starve one day und eat nottings der next. I choose take dem out once und give dem sauerkraut und wiener." When there was no answer to his rap, he pushed the door open and entered, being altogether on a brotherly footing with his fellow lodgers. The pen drawings with their pendant squibs were lying on Jimaboy's desk, and when Lanterman comprehended, he sat down in Jimaboy's chair and dwelt upon them. "Himmel!" he gurgled, "dot's some of de little woman's fooling. Gut, sehr gut. I must show dot to Hausbrock." And when he went out, the copy for the 2 advertisements was in his pocket. Jimaboy got a check from the Story Lovers that afternoon, and in the hilarity consequent upon such sudden and unexpected prosperity, the Postgraduate School of W.B. was forgotten. But not permanently. Late in the evening, when Jimaboy was filing and scraping laboriously on another story, he always worked hardest on the heels of a check, Isabel thought of the pen drawings and looked in vain for them. "What did you do with the W.B. jokes, Jimmy?" she asked. "I didn't do anything with them. Don't tell me they're lost." in mock concern. "They seem to be. I can't find them anywhere." "Oh, they'll turn up again all right," said Jimaboy, and he went on with his polishing. They did turn up, most surprisingly. 3 days later Isobel was glancing through the 30-odd pages of the swollen Sunday Times, and she gave a little shriek. "Horrors!" she cried. "The Times has printed those ridiculous jokes of ours, and run them as advertisements." "What?" shouted Jimaboy. "It's so. See here." It was so, indeed, on the Wit and Humor page, which was half reading matter and half advertising. The Postgraduate School of W.B. figured as large as life, with very fair reproductions of Isobel's drawings heading the displays. "Heavens!" ejaculated Jimaboy, and then his first thought was the jealous authors. "Isn't it the luckiest thing ever that the spirit didn't move me to sign those things?" "You might as well have signed them," said Isobel. "You've given our street and number." "My kingdom!" groaned Jimaboy. "Here, you lock the door behind me while I go hunt Hasbrouck. It's a duel with siege guns at 10 paces, or a suit for damages with him." He was back again in something under the hour, and his face was haggard. "We are lost," he announced tragically. "There is nothing for it now but to run." "However did it happen?" queried Isobel. "Oh, just as simply and easily as rolling off a log, as such things always happen. Lantermann saw the things on the desk, and your sketches caught him. He took 'em down to show to Hasbrouck, and Hasbrouck, meaning to do us a good turn, marked the skits up for the Wit and Humor page. The intelligent make-up foreman did the rest. Says, of course, he took 'em for ads, and run 'em as ads." "But what does Mr. Hasbrouck say?" "He gave me the horse laugh. Said he would see to it that the advertising department didn't send me a bill. When I began to pull off my coat he took it all back and said he was all kinds of sorry, and would have the mistake explained in tomorrow's paper. But you know how that goes. Out of the 150,000 people who will read those miserable squibs today, not 5,000 will see the explanation tomorrow. Oh, we've got to run, I tell you. Skip, fly, vanish into thin air." But sober second thought came after a while to relieve the panic pressure. 506 Hayward Avenue was a small apartment house, with a dozen or more tenants, lodgers or light housekeepers, like the Jimaboys. All they would have to do would be to breathe softly and make no mention of the Postgraduate School of W.B. Then the other tenants would never know, and the postman would never know. Of course, the non-delivery of the mail might bring troublesome inquiry upon the Times advertising department, but, as Jimaboy remarked maliciously, that was none of their funeral. Accordingly, they breathed softly for a continuous week, and carefully avoided personal collisions with the postman. But temporary barricades are poor defenses at the best. One day, as they were stealthily scurrying out to luncheon, they had acquired the stealthy habit to perfection by this time, they ran plump into the laden mail carrier in the lower hall. "Hello," said he, "you are just the people I've been looking for. I have a lot of letters and postal cards for the Postgraduate School of something or other, 506 Hayward. Do you know anything about it?" They exchanged glances. Isobel said, "Are you going to make me tell the fib?" And Jimaboy said, "Help! I guess maybe they belong to us." It was the man who weakened. "At least, it was our advertisement that brought them. Much obliged, I'm sure." And a breathless minute later they were back in their rooms with the fateful and fearfully bulky packet on the desk between them, and such purely physical and routine things as luncheon quite forgotten. "James Augustus Jimaboy, what have you done?" demanded the accusing angel. "Well, somebody had to say something, and you wouldn't say it," retorted Jimaboy. "Jimmy, did you want me to lie?" "That's what you wanted me to do, wasn't it? But perhaps you think that one lie, more or less, wouldn't cut any figure in my case." "Jimmy, dear, don't be horrid. You know perfectly well that your curiosity to see what was in those letters was too much for you." Jimaboy walked to the window and shoved his hands deep into his pockets. It was their first quarrel, and being unfamiliar with the weapons of that warfare, he did not know which one to draw next. And the one he did draw was a tin dagger, crumpling under the blow. "It has been my impression all along that curiosity was a feminine weakness," he observed to the window panes. "James Jimaboy, you know better than that. You've said a dozen times in your stories that it was just the other way about. You know you have. And besides, I didn't let the cat out of the bag." Here was where Jimaboy's sense of humor came in. He turned on her quickly. She was the picture of righteous indignation trembling to tears, whereupon he took her in his arms, laughing over her as she might have wept over him. "Isn't this rich?" he gasped. We built this thing on our specialty, and here we are qualifying, like cats and dogs, for our great mission to a quarrelsome world. Listen, Bella dear, and I'll tell you why I weakened. It wasn't curiosity or just plain everyday scare. There is sure to be money in some of these letters, and it must be returned. Also, the other people must be told that it was only a joke." But we've broken our record and quarreled," she sobbed. "Never mind," he confronted. "Maybe that was necessary too. Now we can add another course to the curriculum and call it the exquisite art of making up. Let's get to work on these things and see what we are in for." They settled down to it in grim determination, cutting out the downtown luncheon and munching crackers and cheese while they opened and read and wrote and returned money and explained and re-explained in deadly and wearisome repetition. "My land," said Jimaboy, stretching his arms over his head, when Isobel got up to light the lamps. "Isn't the credulity of the race a beautiful thing to contemplate? Let's hope the furor will die down as suddenly as it jumped up. If it doesn't, I'm going to make Hasbrouck furnish us a stenographer and pay the postage." But it did not die down. For a solid fortnight they did little else than write letters and postcards to anxious applicants, and by the end of the 2 weeks Jimaboy was starting up in his bed of nights to rave out the threadbare formula of explanation. "Dear Madam, the ad you saw in the Sunday Times was not an ad. It was a joke. There is no postgraduate school of W.B. in all the world. Please don't waste your time and ours by writing any more letters." The first rift in the cloud was due to the good offices of Hasbrouck. He saw matter of public interest in the swollen jest and threw the columns of the Sunday Times open to Jimaboy. Under the racking pressure, the sentimentalist fired volley upon volley of scathing ridicule into the massed ranks of anxious inquirers, and finally came to answering some of the choicest of the letters in print. "Good," said Hasbrouck, when the Jimaboy column in the Sunday paper began to be commented on and quoted, and he made Jimaboy an offer that seemed like sudden affluence. But the crowning triumph came still later in a letter from the editor of one of the great magazines. Jimaboy got it at the Times office, and some premonition of its contents made him keep it until Isobel could share it. "We have been watching your career with interest," wrote the great man, "and we are now casting about for some one to take charge of a humorous department to be called Bathos and Pathos, which we shall in the near future add to the magazine. May we see more of your work, as well as some of Mrs. Jimaboy's sketches?" "Oh, Jimmy dear, you've found yourself at last." But his smile was a grin. "No," he said, "we've just got our diplomas from the Postgraduate School of W.B. That's all." End of How Jimaboy Found Himself. Recording by Ginger Kukalo.